My father was a truck driver, and this experience shook him to his core. Christmas of 2007 was an event that has always stood out in my mind, and now it always will. I was 13 at the time, and that was the first and only year that Dad missed Christmas. He worked as a long-haul truck driver, and we were used to him being gone for weeks, or even occasional months at a time. He always made it a point to be home for our birthdays and Christmas, however. But that year was different. Mom was worried when he said he had one final load to deliver before the holiday season. His plan was to make his delivery and then be home on the 23rd just in time for Christmas. But Mother Nature had other ideas. As fate would have it, his route from our home in Minneapolis to Billings, Montana, would take him right into the heart of a looming blizzard along I-94. Snow was falling in bunches at the time, and Dad said he was debating whether or not to pull over for the night in hopes it would clear up. He decided to try and just keep going when the road made the decision for him. He was only about an hour away from Billings when his truck struck an unexpected patch of ice, causing him to lose control and slide off the road into the median. Thankfully, he wasn't injured, but his truck was wedged in nearly 2 feet of packed snow. It was around midnight when this happened. He tried everything he could to get the truck out of the snowdrift, but it was no use. Of course, his phone signal was non-existent as well, so he couldn't even call for assistance. The roads were virtually devoid of other travelers by that point as well. He radioed into a local emergency office, but was told the roads were too hazardous to travel at the moment. In the end, he could do nothing but wait. Meanwhile, Christmas came and went for us, and we didn't hear anything from Dad. Mom was a nervous wreck, although she tried to hide it, while me and my 2 sisters were just sad that he wasn't there with us. Thankfully, Dad finally called late on Christmas evening. He apologized profusely for not being with us, and promised he would get home as soon as possible. He did just that 2 days later, and we were relieved to have him back. He returned with a bundle of late Christmas gifts, and all was well once more. Dad was different, though. He was quiet, and appeared as though his mind was focused elsewhere. I didn't question him on it, but I could tell that something was troubling him. Life went on, and Dad never missed another Christmas after that. He in fact began just taking the entire month of December off to prevent anything like that ever happening again. I didn't know this at the time, but he later told me that he never drove down EI-94 again. He outright refused deliveries that took him along that stretch, and would take detours that added multiple hours to his trip if it meant avoiding that spot. Us kids are all grown up now, with kids of our own. My son just turned 2, and our whole family was once again together over this previous Christmas. We sat around watching as Mom and Dad lovingly spoiled their grandchildren with goodies. I don't think I've ever seen my dad with such a beaming smile. Later that night, when the sugar rush had finally worn off and the kids had gone to bed, Dad and I were left alone on the balcony. We sipped some of his whiskey and puffed on cigars as we got to talking. I'll skip over the bulk of what we talked about, because that's not really why I'm here. Eventually, we started talking about his newfound retirement from truck driving, and I asked him a question which I'd never really asked before. You ever experience anything really creepy on the road? Dad was no stranger to talking about his experiences. He had infamous tales of him getting mobbed by crackheads in Atlanta, hitting a cow in Nebraska, and the things he saw while driving through Ferguson a few years back during the civil unrest. He was never shy to tell them, but this time, he paused. He swished the whiskey around his glass for a moment, as if silently debating whether he wanted to tell me. I guess I might as well tell you now. He downed the remainder of his drink and clasped his hands in front of him. You remember the year I missed Christmas? By this point, I had almost entirely forgotten about it, but when he said that, a torrent of memories came spiraling back. Yeah, Mom was pissed, I replied. Dad gave a hearty chuckle at that and nodded. Oh yeah, she never let me forget it. That was that crazy blizzard, right? When your truck got stuck? Dad nodded. Yup, damn near flipped my rig that night. Ironically, that snowdrift probably saved my life just as much as it screwed me over. He then paused and broke eye contact as he contemplated his wording. That wasn't the scary part, though. Dad explained that the area he went off the road was essentially a barren wasteland. No cities or gas stations around him. just a winding expanse of road in both directions between dozens of foothills. He again mentioned he had no cell reception and wasn't sure what to do aside from just wait for someone to pass by. After a few minutes, it became apparent that wasn't going to happen. The snow fell in buckets that night, and before long it nearly reached the bottom of his door. Dad's truck at the time was a Cascadia 125 mid-roof sleeper. He had a full sleeping compartment behind the front seat, and provisions to last him a few weeks if necessary. He wasn't too worried about being stranded, at least not at first. After giving up on getting his phone to work, he crawled into the bunk area of the cab and popped a DVD in his portable TV. He figured he may be stuck out there for at least the night, so he might as well just relax until help arrived. He made sure to insist that if he wanted to, he could have probably figured out a way to get his truck out if he really tried, but he was exhausted and decided to just get some sleep. He said he drifted off not long after, only to awake sometime later to complete darkness. The temperature had plummeted, and he instinctually hugged his arms and felt the goosebumps lining his arms. He'd left his truck idling before he fell asleep, but it wasn't running anymore. Confused, he crawled into the front seat to find the keys still in the ignition. He twisted the key, and the engine soon rumbled back to life, but something was wrong. He said the noise of the engine morphed into a gurgling, clanging mess of metal and fluid that produced a god-awful cacophony. His dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, displaying just about every single warning light the system had. Steam began to pour from the hood vents, and the distinct smell of boiling coolant filled the air. After letting it run maybe 10 seconds, he shut it off in fear of doing permanent damage to it. He knew that something wasn't right with it, and sighed as he contemplated going out into the cold night to see if he could figure out what it was. He bundled himself up tight and popped the hood. He said the night had this almost ethereal silence to it as he stepped out of the cab. His feet crunched in the snow, echoing like crashing thunder when compared to the pervasive silence. He made his way around the front and opened it up, releasing a plume of steam from within. After it dissipated a bit, he leaned in and found something which made him quite confused. Oil and coolant was splashed all over the underside of the hood, with many other parts of the engine covered in gunk as well. Dad climbed off the grill and glanced underneath the carriage, and that's when he found something truly odd. The oil pan was shredded on the bottom of the engine. He said it looked as though someone had chopped it with an axe a couple dozen times. The oil had all spilled out into the snow beneath. Clearly, that was why the engine had been running so rough, but explaining how it happened was another matter entirely. He checked around the area and said it seemed like some of the oil was dripped away from the road and towards the trees. He looked closer and spied what very much seemed like footprints accompanying them. As if the winter night wasn't cold enough, that discovery really tanked his blood temperature. He quickly headed back towards his cab, but as he reached for the handle, something stopped him dead in his tracks. Something moved behind the end of his trailer, too quick to make out any physical details. It moved on 2 legs and was clearly no animal. Dad just froze, his fight or flight instincts seeming to stalemate within him. He thought about calling out, but said that didn't seem like a good idea. After a few seconds of silence, he made a mad dash to his cab and locked the doors behind him. After grabbing the pistol from underneath his seat, he hopped into the rear with his heart racing. He positioned himself where he was able to glance out both side mirrors, but saw no sign of whoever was behind the trailer. The radio too was out, and after trying in vain to get it to work, he sat back. It didn't make any sense to him. Even if the engine wouldn't fire up the batteries, should have had enough reserve charge to power the radio for a little while. He tried calling on Biss' cell phone too, and although managed to get it to ring a few times, it would always just cut out. Hours passed, and not much of anything happened. He dozed off once or twice, but tried his best to stay awake and wait for the sun to rise. The snow had since stopped, but not a single other car had driven by since he had stopped. He figured the pass itself was closed, but hoped someone would have been by. Sometime later, he heard a noise emanate from outside. It started as a slight thump, with another soon following, then another, and another. The sounds gradually grew louder, and his heart lodged in his throat as it grew nearer. Someone was on his trailer, and he didn't know what to do about it. He clutched his pistol tight, aiming it up towards the roof. Just as he was certain the person was about to reach the roof of the cab, the sound stopped. He waited there, pistol trembling in his grip for them to emerge, but they never did. Minutes turned to hours, and he never heard another sound from the roof. He said after a while he was no longer even sure whether he had heard anything to begin with. Eventually his guard slipped, and the drowsiness took over. He doesn't know if this next part is related, but he's never had anything happen like it, so I figured I'd include it too. He dreamed as he slept there, but it wasn't a normal dream. He said he remembers walking through a dark forest and viewing it all with incredible vivid detail. He was completely lucid and says to this day, almost 30 years later, it was the most incredibly realistic dream he's ever had. Even looking back on it, he says it felt so real, it's hard for him to distinguish it from reality. He seemed genuinely disturbed as he told me about it too. The forest he was walking through had these massive looming trees that seemed hundreds of feet tall. Twisted roots surrounded their bases, which sprouted from the ground and twisted all over like the tentacles of the kraken. He had to dip and duck around them as he moved, going further but not knowing why. As he made his way through, he started hearing this noise like the ticking of a clock. It got louder as he moved. Then sure enough, he found the source. A large grandfather clock ticking away in the middle of the bundle of roots. He stopped and stared at it for a moment as it ticked away. The clock's tone reverberated, but began to slow. In a few moments, it had begun ticking much slower, and the clock itself began to melt. Suddenly, he saw things emerging in the distance from behind the trees. Horrible, twisted creatures like the spawns of hell. The sounds of cackling and snarling swirled around him, and he began to run. He hurtled and leapt through the roots, but didn't make it far. Something struck him hard from behind, knocking him onto his chest. He then awoke with a gasp, panting heavily with a cold sweat permeating his entire body. He scrambled to a seated position while on the brink of panic. His heart was throbbing so fast and hard that it ached. He took a moment to compose himself, and the immense relief that overcame him was one of sheer relief, but it did not last. Something moved at his window, and his eyes shot up. There he saw the face staring back at him. He froze, as stiff as a corpse and cold as a glacier. Time seemed to stand still then, but finally, he found the strength to raise his pistol. He fired without really even thinking. A loud bang reverberated in, and the muzzle flare momentarily disoriented him. He looked up to see a bullet hole in the window, and no sign of the face. After waiting there a few moments, he ventured to the driver's seat and peered out, but there was nothing there. No sign of that thing ever being there. It didn't make sense to him, as he was certain he saw it. What made even less sense was the fact that his phone read that it was only 12:13 a.m., Last he remembered checking his phone, it read 12:08 a.m., and he swears on everything that had to have been at least an hour before he dozed off. By this point in his story, I had to question myself on whether he was pulling my leg. My father is a bit of a prankster for sure, but he's never weaved an elaborate story like this before. He then spent some time glancing around out the windows and ensuring no one else was around. He almost thought he should just leave his truck and start walking back to town, but obviously that was an incredibly dangerous notion that probably would have gotten him killed. He stared at his phone for quite a while, watching the minutes slowly tick onward. Too slowly. He swore time wasn't working as normal. Several times he counted aloud to 60, doing his best to approximate a minute. But the minute didn't change accordingly. He eventually just kept counting upwards, finding the minute finally changed when he reached 386. You'd think that after all these worrying discoveries that sleep would have been the last thing he wanted, but it wasn't enough to prevent. He said he tried adamantly to resist the urge, but the drowsiness that overtook him was impossible to fight. He found himself walking in the snow, listening as it crunched beneath his feet. A dark and silent forest surrounded him in all directions. It was robotic, as if his body acted of its own accord while his mind drifted in the doldrums. He could barely see where he was going, but it didn't seem to matter. Suddenly he stopped and seemed to spring back to reality. He glanced around side to side, a sudden terror gripping him. Where was he? Why was he outside of his truck? He wondered. He spun back, but couldn't even see the road behind him. The cold sunk into him, and then he saw it. From further in the woods, a familiar face stared back, pale, gaunt, and inhuman. It crawled on all fours, shimmering and shifting side to side. My father turned the complete other way and ran like hell. Tree branches raked against him as he fled half-blind away from the thing in the woods. Nothing looked familiar, and he just continued running aimlessly through the woods, checking behind him periodically to see if the thing was following him. He never saw it or heard it, but he knew it was there. Eventually, he smelled the faint scent of smoke lingering in the air. He followed it, hearing a commotion behind him, and soon came across a small clearing. In the center of it was a log cabin, with smoke trickling from the chimney. Seeing no other option, he dashed towards it and knocked on the door. Behind him, he could hear odd sounds coming from the woods, and thankfully, the door opened a few seconds later. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice of elderly man called from within. Dad turned and saw the barrel of a shotgun aimed at his chest. He slowly raised his hands to convey he meant no threat. "Please, sir. He said. He paused as he thought that certainly this man was going to think he was some lunatic, but he said it anyways. "There's something out there." The man's furious glance reverted to one of intrigue. He then looked past my dad and out into the forest, his eyes suddenly growing wide. Suddenly he backed up, still aiming the shotgun at my dad while waving him inside. He pointed him over to a chair in the corner. Dad complied and sat as the man locked up behind him. He waited there a couple seconds there, but apparently heard nothing of concern. "What are you doing out here?" My dad then told him what had happened with his truck and the blizzard. He then told him about the odd occurrences that had happened later on, which culminated in him suddenly sleepwalking through the woods. The man sighed and finally lowered his shotgun. He got my dad some water and took a seat across from him. "Lot of weird things in these woods." Dad paused as he waited for the man to continue. The man formally introduced himself as Duncan and said his family had owned that plot of land for nearly 100 years. He said he lost count of how many search parties had come through over the years, as well as thrill seekers, ghost hunters, and generally odd people. I saw a face. Dad finally confessed to him. Duncan eyed him curiously. "What kind of face?" Dad described it much as he had before, and Duncan just shook his head. "Well, that's a new one." He let out a sarcastic chuckle then. "You hear all kinds of stories. UFOs, Bigfoot, cults, but none of them can ever provide proof." "So you don't believe in any of it?" my dad asked, only to be countered by Duncan. "Of course I do. I've lived out here long enough to know that we humans do not dictate these woods. There are things that lurk in shadows all over the globe, and we may never understand them. But as for what you saw..." He paused for a moment, seeming to contemplate as he folded his hands on his lap. "There's a group of Native Americans that are rumored to have once lived here, the Apalkari. Ever hear of them?" Dad shook his head. "Neither had I, but a friend of mine who has since passed told me about him. He was an Arapaho man himself, and said that for generations his people had told tales of these Apalkari. Most other groups feared them, said the things they did were evil, more so than the standard tribal warfare one would expect. People say they held these rituals and experiments, and were rumored that their cruelty was matched only by their intellects. Some people say they weren't even human, but that's neither here nor there." Duncan trailed off once more, taking a sip of tea from his side table. "One of the rumors that many people attribute to the Apalkari is that of the wrong ones. A lot of names for 'em, really. Not rights, liars, and uncannies. Things that look human but ain't, and some look less human than others. Long faces, wide mouths, huge eyes. A lot of variations. Some say they can affect time and space itself, and others blame them for a lot of weird disappearances." He paused and took another sip, then chuckled. "I can't speak to the validity of all that firsthand, but things for certain. There are a lot of weird disappearances, and no one seems to have an answer for them." The air from the room seemed to deflate from his torso, and Dad eyed the curious man. He'd clearly seen a lot over his time, but Dad didn't know how much of his tales to believe. He still doesn't. "If all these things are happening, then why do you live out here?" Dad finally asked. Duncan reclined in the seat and thought. Dad expected an answer related to his inherited property, but the reality was a bit different. He did in fact mention his ancestral home being part of it, but had more to say. If I was 20 years younger, maybe I would leave, but I don't think it'd matter. There ain't a place on earth you could run to if they wanted to get you. Dad said a shiver descended his spine then, and Duncan didn't seem boastful or wild as he spoke, but more as though his realization was just a foregone conclusion. Thankfully, Duncan allowed my dad to stay the night, and in the morning, the two of them made their way back to the road. Luckily, Duncan had a big Dodge diesel that was able to plow through the snow with relative ease. They soon reached my dad's abandoned rig, finding it in even worse state than he'd last seen it the previous night. Multiple tires were slashed, windows were broken, and the engine was absolutely shredded from the bottom. After looking around, though, he found nothing had actually been stolen. Duncan gave him a ride into town to get his truck towed, and a week or so later, he was finally headed home. "So, do you believe in that kind of stuff?" I finally asked him, after he seemed to be done retelling his story. Well, I'd be kinda stupid not to now. He and I both laughed at that, but clearly, he had more he wanted to say. It was a really weird experience for sure, but I've always thought that maybe I misremembered it or subconsciously exaggerated it in my mind. Something about it, though, is just so haunting. Like I saw something that night that I really wasn't supposed to see and never want to see again. He just sat there for a moment in silence, and I figured it best not to ask him any more questions. He eventually told me that between the time of him crashing his truck to when he finally made it into town with Duncan, that 3 entire days had passed. He still doesn't know how to account for that, and apparently Duncan didn't either. There's a lot of unanswered questions to this that he may never get the answer to now. He kept in touch with Duncan over the years, but unfortunately he passed away back in 2019. I love my dad, and it's disconcerting seeing him that way, confused and terrified. I cannot completely attest to the validity of his story, but I believe him. For many who read this, I'm sure it will just amount to words on a paper, or maybe a fictitious story that entertained you for a few minutes. But to me, it's a horrific possibility at the very least. If anyone has any experiences like this, or theories, then feel free to share them. Whatever the case, you won't catch me anywhere near I-94 in Billings anytime soon. My father was a truck driver. He told about his otherworldly experience. My father used to be a truck driver before he took an early retirement. There was many times throughout my childhood where I was never able to see him since his job took him across the southern states. But boy, did he have some stories to tell us. There was one particular night, my father, Jack Thompson, had a little too much to drink, and he told me the reason why he quit the industry and swore by his life to forbid me from driving rigs like he did. He took a sip of his whiskey, and the story went like this. The sun had began to dip below the Georgia horizon and hid behind the pines, casting long shadows over the winding roads that crisscrossed the southern state. I was a seasoned truck driver and seen my fair share of strange things. But as all of us truckers had odd stories, I navigated my rig through the fading light. The hum of the engine blending with the cicada's evening chorus brought me at peace. I always used to love traveling this route. I had traveled this road countless times, but tonight was different. An unsettling stillness lingered in the air. As I approached a desolate stretch of Highway 27, the tall pines lining the roadside seemed to close in on me, creating a tunnel of shadows. The sky turned shades of crimson and indigo, and the air took on a palpable heaviness. A flicker of uncertainty crossed my mind, but I dismissed it as fatigue since I had been driving for quite some time. I took a sip of my coffee and gripped the steering wheel tighter. My heart almost came out of my chest when my radio crackled to life with the voice of another trucker. Larry was on the same route. "Hey, Jack, you feel that too? Something's off about this stretch of road tonight." I chuckled nervously, attributing the unease to the late hour and the solitary nature of the highway. "Probably just the quiet getting to us, Larry. These roads can play tricks on the mind," but I noticed Larry's voice was tinged with a hint of genuine concern. "Nah, Jack, I've been down this route more times than I can count, and it's never felt like this. Keep your eyes peeled." As the miles ticked away, My unease deepened. The forest seemed to press against the road, the trees closing in like silent sentinels. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of my truck's tires against the pavement. I began glancing at my rearview mirror and noticed a pair of headlights in the distance, steadily gaining on me. The radio buzzed with static as Larry's voice trembled. "Jack, that driver, there's no one in there. It's empty." The approaching truck emerged from the shadows, an old, weather-beaten rig with faded paint laying on the horn. It bore the name Renegade on its front bumper. I squinted at the sight in disbelief. That truck had been decommissioned years ago after a fatal accident on these very roads. A chill ran down my spine as I thought that it's impossible. It should be rusting away in a junkyard by now. The truck drew closer, its headlights illuminating the road with an eerie glow. I could almost feel the weight of its history, the tragedy that had left it a ghostly relic. As it overtook me, I glimpsed at a shadowy figure in the driver's seat, its features obscured by darkness. In the distance, the truck's taillights flickered, and it vanished into the night, leaving me stunned in silence. The air hung heavy with an unspoken understanding that something otherworldly had just passed through our lives. As I continued down the stretch of road, a fog rolled in, obscuring the road ahead. My truck's headlights cut through the mist, revealing ghostly shapes that seemed to dance at the edge of visibility. Whispers echoed in the void, distant and indistinct. My heart raced as I pressed on, the fog thickening around me, ready to take me at any given moment. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life again, Larry's voice now laced with urgency. "Jack, you've got to get out of there. That fog, it's not natural. I'm seeing things, man. Things I can't explain." My breath became stuck in my throat as I caught a glimpse of shadowy figures moving within the fog. Desperation crept into his voice. "Larry, I can't see a damn thing. What's happening?" But before Larry could respond, the radio descended into a chorus of distorted voices, each one overlapping in a symphony of unsettling whispers. My heart pounded in my chest as I wrestled with the steering wheel, the fog closing in like an impenetrable wall. The road twisted and turned, disorienting me. In its haunting landscape, I caught glimpses of things, ungodly things I had never seen, my most horrific nightmares, aberrations of long-forgotten travelers. The whispers grew louder, forming words that clawed at the edges of my sanity. I slammed the brakes on. From the fog, a woman dressed in white walked in front of my rig. My stomach turned upside down, and I released the contents of my stomach. I knew I had hit that woman, but looking in my rear view, there she was, as she had passed right through the truck like she was part of the fog itself. The radio crackled back to life, Larry's voice unrecognizable through distortion. The woman and the aberrations vanished in the rearview mirror as I emerged from the fog, the whispering voices gradually fading. The road stretched ahead, returning to a semblance of normalcy. The moon cast an eerie glow on the asphalt, revealing the lingering traces of my otherworldly journey. As I continued my drive, I knew I had witnessed something beyond the realm of the living. Renegade, the fog, the spectral figures, they lingered in my thoughts like a cancer. The radio remained silent, Larry's voice lost in the static. The highway unfolded beneath my wheels, leading me away from the haunted stretch of road. The night pressed on, but the weight of the supernatural encounter clung to me. The road, once familiar and predictable, now held secrets that defied the logic of the living. And as I drove out of the unknown, I couldn't help but wonder what happened to Larry, or was he even real to begin with, and what other mysteries lay hidden in the shadows of the southern highways. There's a reason most truckers don't stop for hitchhikers. You know how in college, or when you're just dirt poor, you come to enjoy certain shit foods? Like ramen, microwave burritos, cheap frozen pizza. I figure it's the same principle with long-haul drivers and truck stops. I'd only been on the road for 2 years before, and I'd only be on it for another 3 after, but I'd already grown a taste for greasy sausages and bad coffee. This time I couldn't enjoy the crappy meal on account of the man sitting 2 booths over. His appearance and clothes were normal enough, if a bit underdressed for the Colorado winter. I think it was the way he stared, scanning the room like the damn Terminator, that creeped me out, and all he had in front of him was an untouched cup of decaf. I usually savored these little breaks, but this time I hurried to finish, partly to beat the weather, and partly to get out from under those eyes. Before the waitress came with my check, the man took a seat in the booth across from me without asking. "You a trucker?" He had one of those accents that's impossible to place. "Yeah. Would you allow me to ride with you?" he said with an off-putting smile. "What, to anywhere? You some sort of drifter?" "I have been for some time, but I'm heading home now. I haven't been home in so long." "Shit, you don't even know where I'm going." He blinked at that, the first time I'd seen the gesture from him, then his smile widened. "Oh, going over Vale Pass?" Yeah, to Junction." And then, "Salt Lake." I knew this wasn't the 60s, and big rigs weren't held up by the mob anymore. Even still, I figured if he asked where I was headed next, I'd lie. "You are definitely going where I need to go. I'd very much appreciate a lift. I'd like to help." That was a lie. But I'm not really supposed to pick up hitchhikers. Company vehicle, see? I'm not sure how long the waitress had been there, but enough, I suppose, 'cause she leaned in and whispered, "Please take him out of here. I'll comp your meal, but he's been here all day eyeing me funny. Please." Never have learned how to say no to women, so I sighed and told the stranger to follow me. "What's your name?" I asked as he took a seat. He shifted his weight and said, "We don't need to know each other's names," then added, "Call me whatever you'd like." "Fine by me," I said, not curious a whit about his name or story. I eyed a piece of jerky on the dash. "How about Jim, if you'd like?" "Sorry," I said after a few chilly minutes of uncomfortable silence. "The heater doesn't work all that great." "It'll be nice to get home," he said. "It's so much warmer than here." About that time, the snow started coming down real thick, and I cut my speed in half. Another rig, thick chains on the tires, was tearing down the mountain, clearly none too happy to be stuck behind me. I took the next pull-off, and the driver flashed his hazards in thanks. "What are we doing?" asked Jim, after the familiar hiss of the air brakes quieted. "Checking the weather report. Strapping up the wheels, maybe." Said Jim, his smile gone and brow creased. Then he nodded. "All right. I suppose that'll be fine." I hadn't asked his opinion, but whatever. My phone was lucky to get any service, but I got my answers. Snow was expected to come in waves for several more hours. On this mountain, weather like that had been the end of more than one long hauler. I wasn't desperate enough for cash to risk it. "I hate to do this to you, Jim," I said, sincere. 4 or 5 hours parked with my new friend did not sound fun, but we're stuck here. We don't look stuck. "I just mean it wouldn't be safe to keep driving." I'll help you put the chains on," Jim said, his smile back. "Nah, sorry, I don't push it going downhill on a snowy mountain. But I need to get home. It's just a few hours." He shook his head. Empty smile once again vanished. "You don't understand. If we don't go now, I won't make it home until who knows when." "It's a place, man. It isn't going anywhere." Jim paused. "Yes, it isn't going anywhere. At least we agreed." His eyes followed a van with a driver apparently braver than myself. "You wishing you'd hitched a ride with him?" I asked. And he squinted, then, almost like he was trying to read the license plate. "No, they aren't going where I'm going." "That's too bad then, but I'll still be headed toward your home after the weather clears." "No, you won't." I shivered, and I don't think it was the cold. "Don't you have a job to do?" said Jim. I started to get angry, then, or maybe it was afraid, but I was shaking either way. "Look, I can handle my own business, Jim. Nothing in this trailer is perishable. If I'm a little late, I'm a little late." "No," he shouted, and I swear for a moment his face barely looked human. "I insist you drive now." He was like a small child throwing a tantrum. All right, that's enough, I said, hand ready to dart for the glove box where I kept my magnum, but I swear Jim's eyes bore right through the plastic, and he knew that I was packing. Okay, my voice cracked. I don't like doing this, but you're freaking me out. I need you to leave. Now. My eyes not leaving my passengers, my right hand still ready to grab the gun. I used my left to fish around for a bag, a bottle of water, my spare coat, and a few sticks of jerky. I tossed it all on Jim's lap. The diner's only a couple miles back. Just stay off the shoulder and you should be fine. He just stared, motionless. I almost wished he would explode again. This is my truck. I'm telling you to leave. I won't need these, he said, dropping the coat and bag but taking the jerky from my dash. He didn't seem angry anymore. Sad, maybe. And then he hopped out. Wait, it's 10 degrees, I yelled. Grabbing the gun and coat, I darted outside, wincing at the wind. There was no sign of Jim, and his tracks stopped after 10 feet or so. I considered calling out, but I guess I was too relieved. Maybe that makes me a shit person, I don't know. But I got back in the cab, locked both doors, kept my revolver handy, and didn't sleep a wink until Grand Junction 10 hours later. Now, I'm sure he was just some lunatic I picked up at a diner. I know that, but sometimes, on snowy March nights, I can't help but wonder. Sometimes I wonder. I'm a long-haul trucker. I stopped for a lost kid on a deserted highway in the dead of night. What I saw attached to him, and the question he asked, is why I don't drive anymore. This happened a few years back. I was doing long-haul, mostly cross-country routes, the kind that take you through vast stretches of nothing. You know the ones, where the radio turns to static for hours, and the only sign of life is the occasional pair of headlights going the other way, miles apart. I was young, eager for the miles, the money, didn't mind the solitude, or so I thought. The route I was on took me across a long, desolate stretch of highway that ran between the borders of two large governmental territories. I don't want to say exactly where, but think big, empty spaces, lots of trees, not much else. It was notorious among drivers for being a dead zone, no signal, no towns for 100 miles either side, and prone to weird weather. Most guys tried to hit it during daylight, but schedules are schedules. Mine had me crossing it deep in the night. I remember the feeling, utter blackness outside the sweep of my headlights, the kind of dark that feels like it's pressing in on the cab. The only sounds were the drone of the diesel engine, the hiss of the air brakes now and then, and the rhythmic thrum of the tires on asphalt. Hypnotic, too hypnotic. I'd been driving for about 10 hours, with a short break a few states back. Coffee was wearing off. The dashboard lights were a dull green glow, comforting in a way, but also making the darkness outside seem even more absolute. My eyelids felt like they had lead weights attached. You fight it, you know, slap your face, roll down the window for a blast of cold air, crank up whatever music you can find that hasn't dissolved into static. I was doing all of that. It must have been around 2 or 3 a.m. I was in that weird state where you're not quite asleep, but not fully awake either. Like your brain is running on low power mode. The white lines on the road were starting to blur together, stretching and warping, standard fatigue stuff. I remember blinking hard, trying to refocus. That's when I saw it, or thought I saw it. Just a flicker at the edge of my headlights, on the right shoulder of the road. Small, low to the ground. For a split second, I registered a shape, vaguely human-like, and then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness as I passed. My first thought, deer, or a coyote, common enough. But it hadn't moved like an animal. It had been upright. My brain, sluggish as it was, tried to process it. Too small for an adult, too still for an animal startled by a rig. Then the logical part, the part that was still trying to keep me safe on the road, chimed in. You're tired. Seeing things. Happens. And I almost accepted that. I really did. Shook my head, took a swig of lukewarm water from the bottle beside me, kept my eyes glued to the road ahead. The image, though, it kind of stuck. A small upright shape, like a child. No way, I told myself. Out here, middle of nowhere, Middle of the night, impossible. Kids don't just wander around on interterritorial highways at 3 a.m. It had to be a trick of the light, a bush, my eyes playing games. I've seen weirder things born of exhaustion, shadows that dance, trees that look like figures. It's part of the job when you're pushing limits. I drove on for maybe another 30 seconds, the image fading, my rational mind starting to win. Just a figment. Then, I glanced at my passenger side mirror. Habit. Always checking, and my blood went cold. Not just cold, it felt like it turned to slush. There, illuminated faintly by the red glow of my trailer lights receding into the distance, was the reflection of a small figure, standing, on the shoulder of the road, exactly where I'd thought I'd seen something. It wasn't a bush, it wasn't a shadow, it was small, and it was definitely standing there, unmoving. As my truck pulled further and further away, my heart started hammering against my ribs. This wasn't fatigue. This was real. There was someone, something, back there, and it looked tiny. Every instinct screamed at me, danger, wrong, keep going. But another voice, the one that makes us human, I suppose, whispered something else. A kid, alone out here? What if they're hurt, lost? I fought with myself for a few seconds that stretched into an eternity. The image in the mirror was getting smaller, fainter. If I didn't act now, they'd be lost to the darkness again. God, the thought of leaving a child out there, if that's what it was. Against my better judgment, against that primal urge to just floor it, I made a decision. I slowed the rig, the air brakes hissing like angry snakes. Pulled over to the shoulder, the truck groaning in protest. Put on my hazards, their rhythmic flashing cutting into the oppressive blackness. Then, I did what you're never supposed to do with a full trailer on a narrow shoulder. I started to reverse, slowly, carefully, my eyes flicking between the mirrors, trying to keep the trailer straight, trying to relocate that tiny figure. The crunch of gravel under the tires sounded unnaturally loud. It took a minute, maybe two, but it felt like an hour. The red glow of my taillights eventually washed over the spot again, and there it was, a kid. I stopped the truck so my cab was roughly alongside them, maybe 10 feet away. Switched on the high beams, hoping to get a better look, and also to make myself clearly visible as just a truck, not something else. The kid was small, really small. I'd guess maybe 6, 7 years old. Hard to tell in the glare. They were just standing there, on the very edge of the gravel shoulder, right where the trees began. The woods pressed in close on this stretch of road, tall, dark pines and dense undergrowth that looked like a solid black wall just beyond the reach of my lights. The kid wasn't looking at me. They were facing sort of parallel to the road, just walking, slowly, like they were on a stroll, completely oblivious to the massive 18-wheeler that had just pulled up beside them, engine rumbling, lights blazing. They were wearing what looked like pajamas, thin, light-colored pajamas, in the chill of the night. No coat, no shoes that I could see. My mind reeled. This was wrong. So many levels of wrong. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening, amplifying the crickets. The rustle of leaves in the woods from a breeze I couldn't feel in the cab. My heart was still thumping, a weird mix of fear and adrenaline and a dawning sense of responsibility. I rolled down the window. The night air hit me, cold and damp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. "Hey!" I called out. My voice sounded hoarse, too loud in the quiet. "Hey, kid!" No response. They just kept walking, one small bare foot in front of the other, at a pace that was taking them absolutely nowhere fast. Their head was down slightly. I couldn't see their face properly. "Kid, are you okay?" I tried again, louder this time. Slowly, so slowly, the kid stopped. They didn't turn their head fully, just sort of angled it a fraction, enough that I could see a pale sliver of cheek in the spill of my headlights. Still not looking at me. Still ignoring the multi-ton machine idling beside them. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. Not the normal kind of unease. This was deeper, colder. Animals act weird sometimes, but kids. A lost kid should be scared, relieved, something. This one was nothing. "What are you doing out here all alone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, friendly. Like you're supposed to with a scared kid, even though this one didn't seem scared at all. It's the middle of the night. Silence. Just the sound of their bare feet scuffing softly on the gravel as they took another step, then another. As if my presence was a minor inconvenience, a background noise they were choosing to ignore. This wasn't right. My internal alarm bells were clanging louder now. My hand hovered near the gear stick. Part of me wanted to slam it into drive and get the hell out of there, but the image of this tiny child, alone, possibly in shock. I couldn't just leave. Could I? "Where are your parents?" I pushed, my voice a bit sharper than I intended. "Are you lost?" Finally, the kids stopped walking completely. They turned their head, just a little more, still not looking directly at my cab, more towards the front of my truck, into the glare of the headlights. I could see their face a bit better now. Pale, featureless in the harsh light, like a porcelain doll. Small, dark smudges that might have been eyes. No expression. None. Not fear, not sadness, not relief. Just blank. An unreadable slate. Then a voice, small, thin, like the rustle of dry leaves. "Lost." Just that one word. It hung in the air between us. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh wave of concern. Okay, lost. That's something I can deal with. Okay, kid. Lost is okay. We can fix lost. Where do you live? Where were you going? The kid finally, slowly, turned their head fully towards my cab. Towards me. I still couldn't make out much detail in their face. The angle, the light, something was obscuring it, keeping it in a sort of shadowy vagueness despite the headlights. But I could feel their gaze. It wasn't like a normal kid's look. There was a weight to it, an intensity that was deeply unsettling for such a small form. "Home," the kid said, that same thin, reedy voice. "Trying to get home." "Right. Home. Where is home?" I asked, leaning forward a bit, trying to project reassurance. "Is it near here? Did you wander off from a campsite? A car?" There were no campsites for miles, no broken down cars on the shoulder. I knew that. The kid didn't answer that question directly. Instead, they took a small step towards the truck, then another. My hand tensed on the door handle, ready to open it, to offer... What? A ride? Shelter? I didn't know. "It's cold out here," I said, stating the obvious. "You should get in. We can get you warm, and I can call for help when we get to a spot with a signal." My CB was useless, just static. My phone had shown no service for the last hour. The kid stopped about 5 feet from my passenger door, still in that pale, thin, pajama-like outfit. Barefoot on the sharp gravel. They should be shivering, crying. They were doing neither. "Can you help me?" the kid asked. The voice was still small, but there was a different inflection to it now. Less flat. A hint of... something else. Pleading, maybe? "Yeah, of course. I can help you," I said. That's why I stopped. "Where are your parents? How did you get here?" The kid tilted their head, a jerky, unnatural little movement. "They're waiting. At home." "Okay. And where's home? Which direction?" I gestured vaguely up and down the empty highway. The kid didn't point down the road. They made a small, subtle gesture with their head, a little nod towards the trees, towards the impenetrable darkness of the woods lining the highway. "In there," the kid said. My stomach clenched. "In the woods. Your home is in the woods." "Lost," the kid repeated, as if that explained everything. "Trying to find the path. It's dark." "Yeah, it's very dark," I agreed, my eyes scanning the tree line. It looked like a solid wall of black, no sign of any path, any habitation, just dense, old-growth forest. The kind of place you could get lost in for days, even in daylight. "Can you come out?" the kid asked. Help me look? It's not far. I can't see it from here. Every rational thought in my head screamed, no. Get out of the truck. In the middle of nowhere, in the pitch dark, with this strange child who wanted me to go into those woods. Number. Absolutely not. But the kid looked so small, so vulnerable, if there was even a tiny chance they were telling the truth, that their house was just a little way in, and they were genuinely lost. I don't think that's a good idea, buddy, I said, trying to sound gentle. It's dangerous in there at night. For both of us. Best thing is for you to hop in here with me. We'll drive until we get a signal, and then we'll call the police, or the rangers. They can help find your home properly. The kid just stood there, that blank, unreadable face fixed on me. But it's right there, they insisted, their voice a little more insistent now. Just a little way. I can almost see it. If you just step out, the light from your door would help. My skin was crawling. There was something profoundly wrong with this scenario, the way they were trying to coax me out, the lack of normal emotional response, the pajamas, the bare feet, the woods. I looked closer at the kid, trying to pierce that strange vagueness around their features. My headlights were bright, but it was like they absorbed the light rather than reflected it. Their eyes, I still couldn't really see their eyes, just dark hollows. I really think you should get in the truck, I said, my voice firmer now. It's warmer in here. We can figure it out together. The kid took another step closer. They were almost at my running board now. Please, they said, that reedy voice again. My leg hurts. I can't walk much further. If you could just help me a little. Just to the path. My internal conflict was raging. My trucker instincts, honed by years of seeing weird stuff and hearing weirder stories at truck stops, were blaring warnings. But the human part, the part that saw a child in distress, was still there, still arguing. I was tired, so damn tired. Maybe I wasn't thinking straight. Maybe this was all some bizarre misunderstanding. I squinted, trying to see past the kid, towards the tree line they'd indicated. Was there a faint trail I was missing? A flicker of light deep in the woods? Number. Nothing. Just blackness. Solid, unyielding blackness. And then I saw it. It wasn't something I saw clearly at first. It was more like an anomaly, a disturbance in the darkness behind the kid. The kid was standing with their back mostly to the woods, facing my truck. Behind them, the darkness of the forest was absolute, or it should have been. But there was something connected to them, something that stretched from the small of their back, from under the thin pajama top, and disappeared into the deeper shadows of the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a weird shadow cast by my headlights, hitting them at an odd angle. Maybe a rope they were dragging? A piece of clothing snagged on a branch? I leaned forward, trying to get a clearer view. The kid was still talking, their voice a low, persistent murmur. It's not far. Please, just help me. I'm so cold. But I wasn't really listening to the words anymore. I was focused on that thing behind them. It wasn't a rope. It wasn't a shadow. It was a tube. A long, dark, thick tube. It seemed to emerge directly from the kid's lower back, impossibly, seamlessly. It was dark matte, like a strip of the night itself given form, and it snaked away from the child, maybe 10, 15 feet, before disappearing into the inky blackness between two thick pine trunks. It wasn't rigid. It seemed to have a slight, almost imperceptible flexibility, like a massive, sluggish umbilical cord made of shadow. It didn't reflect any light from my headlamps. It just absorbed it. My breath hitched in my throat. My blood, which had been cold before, now felt like it had frozen solid. This wasn't just wrong. This was impossible. Unnatural. The kid was still trying to coax me. Are you going to help me? It's just there. You're so close. My voice, when I finally found it, was barely a whisper. I couldn't take my eyes off that appendage. Kid, what? What is that? Behind you? The kid flinched. Not a big movement, just a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of their small frame. Their head, which had been tilted pleadingly, straightened. The blankness on their face seemed to solidify. "What's what?" they asked, their voice suddenly devoid of that pleading tone. It was flat again, colder. That thing," I stammered, pointing with a shaking finger. "Coming out of your back, going into the woods. What is that?" The kid didn't turn to look. They didn't need to. Their gaze, those dark, unseen eyes, bored into me. "It's nothing," they said. The voice was still small, but it had a new edge to it, a hardness. "You're seeing things. You're tired." They were using my own earlier rationalization against me. "No," I said, my voice gaining a tremor of conviction born of sheer terror. "No, I'm not. I see it. It's right there. It's connected to you." The kid was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the thumping of my own heart, so loud I was sure they could hear it. The crickets had stopped. The wind seemed to die down. An unnatural stillness fell over the scene. Then the kid's face began to change. It wasn't a dramatic movie monster transformation. It was far more subtle and far more terrifying. The blankness didn't leave, but it sharpened. The pale skin seemed to tighten over the bones. The areas where the eyes were, those dark smudges, seemed to deepen, to become more shadowed, more intense, and a flicker of something ancient and utterly alien passed across their features. It wasn't human anger. It was something older, colder, and infinitely more patient, now strained to its limit. The air in my cab suddenly felt thick, heavy, hard to breathe. "Just come out of the truck," the kid said, and the voice, oh God, the voice. It wasn't the small, reedy voice of a child anymore. It was deeper, resonant, with a strange, grating undertone, like stones grinding together. It was coming from that small frame, but it was impossibly large, impossibly old. It vibrated in my chest. "Come out." Now the command was absolute. My hand, which had been hovering near the gear stick, now gripped it like a lifeline. My other hand fumbled for the ignition key, which I'd stupidly left in. "What are you?" I choked out, staring at the monstrous thing playing dress-up in a child's form, at the dark, pulsating tube that was its anchor to the shadows. The kid's head tilted again, that jerky, unnatural movement. The expression on its face, if you could call it that, was one of pure, unadulterated annoyance, contempt, like I was a particularly stupid insect it had failed to swat. And then it spoke, in that same terrible, resonant, grinding voice. The words it said are burned into my memory, colder than any winter night. "Why?" it rasped, the sound seeming to scrape the inside of my skull. "The fuck are humans smarter now?" That was it. That one sentence. The sheer cosmic frustration in it. The implication of past encounters, of easier prey. The utter alien nature of it. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I reacted. Primal fear, the kind that bypasses all higher brain function, took over. My hand twisted the key. The diesel engine roared back to life, a sudden, violent explosion of sound in the horrifying stillness. The kid, the thing, actually recoiled. A small, jerky step back. The expression, that awful, tightened, ancient look, intensified. I slammed the gear stick into drive. My foot stomped on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel for a terrifying second before they bit into the asphalt. I didn't look at it. I couldn't. I stared straight ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the whole cab vibrating around me. The truck surged forward, gaining speed with agonizing slowness. For a horrible moment, I imagined that tube thing whipping out, trying to snag the trailer, to pull me back, to drag me into those woods. I imagined that small figure, with its ancient, terrible voice, somehow keeping pace. I risked a glance in my driver's side mirror. It was standing there, on the shoulder, unmoving. The headlights of my departing truck cast its small silhouette into sharp relief, and behind it, the dark tube was still visible, a thick, obscene cord snaking back into the endless night of the forest. It didn't seem to be retracting or moving. It just was. The thing didn't pursue, it just stood and watched me go. And that somehow was almost worse. The sheer confidence, the patience, like it knew there would be others. Or maybe it was just annoyed that this particular attempt had failed. I drove. I don't know for how long. I just drove. My foot was welded to the floor. The engine screamed. I watched the speedometer needle climb, far past any legal or safe limit for a rig that size, on a road that dark. I didn't care. The image of that thing, that child shape with its dark umbilical to the woods, and that voice, that awful, grinding voice asking its horrifying question, was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. I must have driven for an hour, maybe more, at speeds that should have gotten me killed or arrested before the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a bone-deep, shaking exhaustion that was more profound than any fatigue I'd ever known. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely keep the wheel straight. Tears were streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from sheer, unadulterated terror and relief. When the first hint of dawn started to gray the eastern sky and my phone finally beeped, indicating a single bar of service, I pulled over at the first wide spot I could find. I practically fell out of the cab, vomiting onto the gravel until there was nothing left but dry heaves. I sat there on the cold ground, shaking, for a long time, watching the sun come up, trying to convince myself that it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, but I knew it wasn't. The detail of that tube, the voice, the question. You don't hallucinate something that specific, that coherent, that utterly alien. I never reported it. Who would I report it to? What would I say? Officer, I saw a little kid who was actually an ancient cosmic horror tethered to the woods by a nightmare umbilical cord, and it got mad because I didn't want to be its dinner. They'd have locked me up, breathalyzed me, drug tested me, sent me for a psych eval. I finished that run on autopilot, dropped the load, drove my rig back to the yard, and I quit. I told them I was burned out, needed a break. They tried to convince me to stay, offered me different routes, more pay. I just couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that kid, that tube, those woods. Every dark road felt like a trap. I found a local job, something that keeps me home at night. I don't drive in remote areas anymore if I can help it, especially not at night. I still have nightmares. Sometimes, when I'm very tired, driving home late from somewhere, I'll see a flicker at the edge of my vision, on the side of the road, and my heart will try to beat its way out of my chest. I don't know what that thing was. An alien? A demon? Something else? Something that doesn't fit into our neat little categories? All I know is that it's out there, and it's patient, and it seems to have learned that its old tricks aren't as effective as they used to be. Why the fuck are humans smarter now? That question haunts me. It implies they weren't always. It implies that once upon a time, we were easier. That maybe, just maybe, people like me, tired and alone on dark roads, used to just step out of the cab when asked, and were never seen again. So, if you're ever driving one of those long, lonely stretches of road, deep in the night, and you see something you can't explain, maybe just keep driving. Maybe being smarter now means knowing when not to stop. Knowing when to ignore that little voice telling you to help, because what's asking for help might not be what it seems. Stay safe out there, and for God's sake, stay on the well-lit roads. I'm a trucker and encountered something terrifying on the road. My name is Richard. I'm a truck driver bringing goods across country and back for a decently good paycheck, but I doubt I'd be returning to that line of work anytime soon. My father was a trucker when I was young. He always told me it was a good job. You're out on the road with the fresh air. You're your own boss. The pay's good. I thought it sounded great, so I wanted to take up trucking and delivering stuff when I got older. When I graduated high school, I did everything I needed, passed the tests and everything. And soon enough, I was out on the road. It was amazing for a year or two. I made good money and it was nice to be on the road and even have my own little room basically in my truck. But there's a reason I said was, though. I doubt I'm ever driving another truck again after what happened to me one winter night. It was around 2 in the morning when it happened. I was driving down the nearly empty highway with the occasional car passing by when I saw what I thought looked like a giant skinny creature running through the trees in the woods to the right of my truck. I thought nothing of it because I was extremely tired after having driven a lot the past few days and shrugged it off as my mind messing around with me. An hour later, around 3, there were no more cars, just me on the highway driving down. Moments later, I saw the same figure running through the trees again, and I started questioning if it was really in my head at this point. My thoughts were interrupted as a long, slender hand reached out of the trees in front of me, slamming into the front of my truck, stopping my truck immediately. The hand had long, blood-stained claws, and I saw another hand creep over the barrier of the highway as a pair of dead eyes stared through the trees. I attempted to get out the car, but the creature flipped the truck over on its side, causing me to slam my head into the dash and go unconscious. My eyes opened a few moments later to see a giant creature coming out of the forest and climbing over the barrier. It was a very skinny, pale white creature with extremely long and skinny limbs. I desperately tried to open the door and get out onto the truck's side, but I passed out again. When I woke in the hospital, they told me I was found a few feet away from my truck, laying on the highway with a bad head injury. Obviously, when I told them about what I saw, they brushed it off with excuses like, "It was all in your head," or, "Your truck hit something and flipped." I didn't believe a word they said, though. I know what I saw. I'm currently sitting in the hospital bed typing this, and I'm still mortified of what I saw on that road in the darkness. My truck was totaled and there were no signs of anyone or anything near the accident site. I plan to quit my job as a trucker and move on to something else, but I'm horrified of what could happen if I were to drive again. I just won't ever feel safe on the road again after what I encountered. What do I do?